Hello and welcome to Countdown to Power with me, Graeme Pryce. I didn't really expect to be making this video, but it ended up being interesting to research and actually led me to ending on a point that I think is much more important than anything I've got to say about Laura Kuenssberg anyway. I'll explain what I mean when I'm wrapping up at the end, and I hope you'll agree that it's a point worth making. But meanwhile, when I actually put Mrs. Kuenssberg on the list of choices on my poll, I thought she was just a placeholder really. I love how the poll for the next video nearly always surprises me on my community page. I sometimes have an idea of who I expect might win, within a small margin, but I'm not often spot on about it. Well, not about that anyway. Laura slotted into the role of chief dickhead for the Tories when she became political editor in 2022. If you're anything like me, I'm sure there's been many a time before that though when you've sat there and despaired at the absolute bias that she's shown when she's presenting various things on the news. I usually make these videos about Tory MPs. I'm on a quest to prove that practically every one of them is a horrible twat after all. But Laura Kuenssberg fits into this category just as well as Nigel Farage or Richard Tice or Lee Anderson or any other videos I've made about people who aren't actually Tory MPs does. I'll explain why right after this. Hey, sorry to interrupt me. I won't keep you long. There are 4 things that YouTube uses in its algorithms. It's whether you've liked, commented and subscribed and how long you've watched the video for. If you could do just one of those 4 things and maybe watch a little bit longer than you thought you might otherwise, it would really help. Thank you very much indeed. Laura took over the BBC's flagship Sunday morning political programme from Andrew Marr in 2022. Before we even begin to talk about how pathetic and biased their approach to interviewing some of the most destructive, divisive and dangerous politicians we've ever seen in British politics is, let's just set the tone for the type of woman she is. When she took over the show in 2022, it had 1.9 million regular viewers, and Andrew Marr was considered a much more balanced interviewer, certainly not perfect, but far more balanced than Laura Kuenssberg. After a year of politely allowing the Tories to dribble out any old drivel and propaganda, the figures had fallen to 1.2 million. Now, Laura may not actually be an elected Tory, but she certainly shares their mindset. She's one of their greatest fans after all. So obviously she is totally and completely and utterly blameless of any and all consequences of her actions. When challenged about the at least 700,000 figure drop in viewers, she took inspiration from her friend Boris and just said, it's not true. She denied any blame and made up some vague and overcomplicated numbers to try and, make it seem like it just didn't mean anything. Again, we have that weird Tory belief that the general public are too stupid to be able to check the veracity of anything they say. In this case, we're expected to believe that every single agency that collects data regarding viewing figures are either wrong and stupid or just lying, and accept Laura's word for it that she hasn't actually lost the BBC nearly 1 million viewers with her sheer dislikability. It's interesting to note that one of Laura's most successful and well discussed editions of Sunday Morning with Laura Kuenssberg is likely the one where the comedian Joe Lycett managed to blag his way on and pretend to be a parody of a total right-wing tosser who had great admiration for Liz Truss. Google it. It's worth a watch, believe me. He was later called on by the Gammon Brigade, who call everything woke and call everyone snowflakes, to apologise to Laura Kuenssberg for embarrassing her on his show. He said no. There was no surprise who Laura Kuenssberg was rooting for in the 2019 general election. There never really is there? But she occasionally really does forget who she claims to work for and take it a bit too far. I'd imagine she was feeling quite giddy and gleeful on polling day in 2019. Obviously, she's going to be privy to a bit more information than you or I, especially as she was still political editor at the time, and her friendly little meetings with Ballbag Johnson were well known and documented and photographed. But she overstepped the mark when she decided to start talking about how postal voting is looking grim for Labour, before polling had even closed. Candidates are allowed to observe the postal votes being verified, but they aren't actually counted until polling ends. So for her to have information of that kind suggested she was either being given information by Tory politicians that she had no right to know, or she was being given information by officials in the polling booth that she had no right to know. I wonder which one it's likely to be. Which one might be more dishonest? She certainly didn't have any decent grounds to be announcing claims like that in her reporting either. And I'm pretty sure she's aware that the Electoral Commission says it is an offence to communicate any information obtained at postal vote opening sessions, including about votes cast before a poll is closed. In 2019, Kerry McCarthy tweeted about the likely results of the postal voting in her constituency. She was reported by the police, probably by some little Tory dickhead like that weirdo with the giant head that keeps reporting Angela Rayner. What's his name? James Daly. Fucker looks like a photoshopped version of himself, doesn't he? How come so many of the most horrible Tory dickheads look like caricatures of themselves? Or Thunderbird puppets? Anyway, I digress. Kerry McCarthy was given a caution by the police. Kerry McCarthy was a Labour MP though. Laura Kuenssberg, she's not a Labour MP. She's a blatantly Tory biased political editor of the BBC. So, you know, that's completely different, isn't it? Obviously. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of complaints to the BBC, but they said that they considered the matter closed. Wonder where they were getting sayings like that from in 2019. Laura is not a well-liked and well-loved national treasure. She's certainly no Carol Vorderman or Judi Dench or Helen Mirren, is she? But what political editors are, especially ones that were women. I was a little bit concerned that I was boxing myself into an echo chamber. And the only reason I had such disdain for Laura Kuenssberg was because I was only reading what left-wing commentators were ever saying about her. So I decided to do a little bit of a wider research. And no, it's true. She's disliked by large amounts of people on all sides of the political spectrum. Left, right and centre. Yet she was still given a flagship Sunday morning politics show. Actually, Sunday morning's a bit of a funny time for an old-fashioned institution like the BBC to be showing something like that. Surely they should be encouraging people to go to church. There are a few Tories that could do with going to church. Actually, no. Most of them would just burst into flames the minute they crossed the holy threshold, wouldn't they? Religious Tories, eh? That might be an idea for another video, that. But I wanted to be fair. So I went and looked at a few sites that I genuinely believed might have some support, if not affection, for Mrs. Kuenssberg. I went and started with half an hour on Mumsnet. They don't like her. There were loads of left-wing people who were just hating on her for a bias, obviously. But I was surprised to see a few people who were Sunak supporters for some unfathomable fucking reason. But they don't like her either. They say that she doesn't give Sunak a chance to talk about what he really wants to say, and she keeps interrupting him. She doesn't give him a chance to just say, delivering, and Labour don't have a plan. That's what he's going to say, isn't it? I had a little look at some of the times she's been mentioned in other countries, but it was mostly America, that the articles that came up when I searched for her. In the US, they seem to think she's disliked because she's a woman. This is from the country that might make Donald Trump president in November. Plus, UK, 3 women prime ministers. US, 46 male presidents. I mean, yeah, all three female prime ministers were absolute fucking disasters. But you know, the point stands. Centrist feelings were a little harder to define. I've had comment sections on places like The Guardian and stuff like that to have a little look, and it was about 50-50. There was some support for it, but there was a lot of people that didn't support it as well. And of course, we on the left know exactly what we think of her. Yet the BBC still keep insisting that she present their flagship political shows and interview all the most important fascist, racists and far-right lunatics, despite evidence of a universal dislike for the woman. What can you say? Remember when we talked about Laura leaking the results of the 2019 postal votes? And how the BBC did absolutely nothing about it? Well, she didn't come out of that looking like too much of a knobhead, because the BBC backed her, and the Tories unfortunately won that election by a landslide. The media had a hell of a lot of other things to be reporting on in the days following that victory. Boris was going to build 40 hospitals and get Brexit done, wasn't he? She did something a bit similar with the mayoral elections for London earlier this month. There was one critical difference though. This time she was as wrong as it is possible to be, and Susan Hall certainly never won a landslide. Laura had been deluding herself that Susan Hall might pull off a surprise victory for a little while apparently. Or maybe it was just a little bit of positive confirmation propaganda, and she thought that if she kept telling all her followers that Susan had a chance of winning, then they might just vote for Susan, because it wasn't worth voting for Khan if he wasn't going to win, was it? Laura had told them that Susan was going to win. In any case, she was completely wrong. When she tweeted, "It's clear tonight that the race is much closer than some polls have suggested," she was obviously totally wrong, wasn't she? But she did preface it this time with, "No votes have been counted yet, so hold on to your hats." Susan Hall was a fucking idiot, and she got absolutely hammered. Laura Kuenssberg is supposed to be a well-educated political expert, and she's apparently backing Susan Hall. Either her credentials are in doubt, or her motives are. And I tell you what, I know which one I'd put money on if I fucking had any after 14 years of the Tories being in office. Some people were suggesting, and especially various offensive members of the right-wing grifting circuit, were suggesting that these rumours were being put out by people like Laura Kuenssberg because they were laying the ground for a Trumpian-style accusation of a stolen election if Susan didn't win. I wouldn't put it past them, and I did see a few idiots trying to insinuate something a bit like that in the few days afterwards on Twitter, but nobody who really meant anything said it. And I think there's enough conspiracy theories out there already, isn't there? Especially while Nadine Dorries is an author. Now, Laura Kuenssberg has said a lot of stupid things on social media, particularly on Twitter. She's also said quite a few poisonous things, and a rather large amount of dishonest things as well. She once used Twitter to mock Labour for saying that the Tories were in talks with American private healthcare companies and pretend that such an idea was absolutely preposterous. You might remember Jeremy Corbyn and then Shadow NHS Secretary Jonathan Ashworth presented documentation proving that this was the case during the 2019 election campaign. But the media wanted to ask questions about anti-Semitism, obviously, and I think a couple of days later it was Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby taking selfies on the breakfast show with Boris Johnson. But looking through Laura's Twitter history was a bit of a learning experience of a different kind as well, which brings me to the point that I mentioned in my opening statement. You lose the argument if you attack the person, not the position. And her Twitter feed, and a few stories that I read about on social media as well, are really shocking. The level of misogynistic abuse and sexism that she receives in her comments is absolutely appalling. There are so many reasons to attack Laura Kuenssberg for her lies and her conduct and her bias that there just isn't any need to get personal. She's not the only woman in politics to suffer like this either, or woman just in political commentary. There's so many stories and horrible insults you can find against her and so many others that are just absolutely appalling. If you're a man that thinks that a decent way to respond to a woman who has an opinion that you don't like is to threaten to rape them, hurt them, or call them appalling sexist insults, then you're not a real man at all. You're barely fucking human. You're just a Neanderthal that has learned how to use words in the worst possible way. You're a guy that is... If you're a guy that's threatening Laura Kuenssberg or Diane Abbott or Angela Rayner or even Carol fucking Malone with sexual assault and actual violence because they've said something you don't agree with, you don't deserve to have an opinion. You're the evolutionary dead end of humanity. Get in the bin. Fuck's sake. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. I never expected this video about the most well-known Tory stooge to end with me defending her from the sections of humanity that are about as pointless and putrid as an infected rectal prolapse. But they're out there, unfortunately. And a lot of them are commenting on things that Laura Kuenssberg and people like her say. Thankfully, most of them are way off on the right, as the last 14 years and basically all of political history has proven. Right-wing politics generally appeals to the most base level, unintelligent and immoral amongst us, but not always. If you've enjoyed the video, hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell so that you'll be notified of any future uploads. If you want to go a bit further, there's links to PayPal, Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee page in the description box. And as always, anything and everything is very, very much appreciated. It took me a while to make this video because I wanted to show you what I think of Laura Kuenssberg, obviously, but I was a bit shocked and appalled by some of the abuse she receives. She deserves, like, some of it, obviously, but she certainly doesn't deserve all of it. That lovely picture of Laura looking so dejected that Supertansky posted on Twitter, and her pathetic attempts to back Susan Hall are a sign of things to come. Imagine the gaining expressions of barely hidden contempt and dismay she's going to have to try and get away with as she watches the worst Tory defeat in history unfold at the next general election. I doubt Laura is very impressed by our countdown to power. The Tories doing such a thing was preposterous and would never happen. You might remember Jeremy fucking Corbyn. Bastard's still fucking haunting me, isn't he? Jeremy fucking Corbyn.